Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
As we start a week where we'll have our second official presidential debate, but first between the actual two people who will be on the ballot for us in November, we have so much to cover, but I want to stay home here, stay local, and discuss the Appalachia school shooting. There's been new information that's come forward in recent days, and let's kind of do a little bit of a reset real quick. This real quick from WXIA TV 11 Alive.
In the last hour, Georgia Democrats gathered with advocates at the state capitol to call on Governor Kemp to hold a special session to enact gun reform legislation.
This, of course, following the deaths of 2 students and 2 teachers at Appalachia High School after a gunman opened fire on Wednesday. Liza Lucas is live where the press conference just wrapped up, and emotions there are running very high today, Liza.
Cheryl and Aisha, just to give you an example, we had a parent here at the Capitol with her son who should normally be in school today. That parent in tears because of a threat that was circulating social media showing a gun naming her child's school. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about emotions running high.
Ross Williams at the Georgia Recorder reporting on this, by the way, and he reports that Alpharetta mom Stella Silva Garcia is the mom in question. She fought back tears, he writes, as she said she was afraid to take her son Lucas to his middle school because of threats made on social media. She said, I had to take my son the day after the shooting and drop him off, and there were 2 patrol cars and a resource officer parked in the entrance of carpool. I cried all day because I couldn't believe that this was happening to our community. She then shared an image of a handgun with text over it listing several North Fulton schools and the words, "You're next." How do we know it's a hoax? How do we know that all those schools aren't going to be targeted today, she asked. Sylvia Garcia continues, I've looked online today. I have friends in Gainesville. I have friends in Buckhead. I have friends who have said online that their schools received this threat as well. How do you go to bed at night and reassure your child that it's okay to go to school the next day? You are traumatizing a generation of children, she says.
Those emotions are playing out for us at the Capitol as Democrats also echo a call for change. State Democrats noting that this is not the first time or the first tragedy where they have called for a special session or policy change. They reminded today that they've stood on these same steps before. They've made the same call for action following the Midtown shooting in Atlanta in May 2023. They say that the frustration, however, is amplified by the fact that the bills addressing gun safety and reform that Democrats have put forth, they don't move forward to the point that they get a hearing. And so today they laid responsibility on Republicans who hold the majority.
But you know what? I do agree with the governor on some level. Wednesday was not the ideal time to talk about policy. The ideal time to have these discussions would have been before the senseless murders of Mason Schermerhorn, Christian Angulo, Ricky Aspinwall, and Christina Irami. And the second best time to deal with it is right now.
That was Representative Syra Draper right there. Again, state Democrats calling for change. Now, the press conference just wrapped up in the last few minutes. So we do plan to reach out to both Georgia Governor Kemp as well as Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who were both called out here today, and ask whether there could be any possibility for a special session. We do know that Democrats are sending their letter over to the governor's office as we speak. Live at the Capitol, Liza Lucas, 11 Alive News.
All right, Liza, thank you. You mentioned the mom and her son and the picture of a threat, and I just want to remind everyone, Liza, that we are on standby for that press conference in Gwinnett County related to threats that have been made at a number of different districts.
Can I just tell you, by the way, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a multimedia piece. It's kind of pointless for me to just read text messages to you, so I won't do that. But I will share this with you in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. You can see a lot of the back and forth exchange, student telling the parents there's a school shooting, heard gunshots, all on lockdown, and then you see the 3 dots and the waiting of the 3 dots in such a moment. Can you just imagine waiting to hear back from your child and the 3 dots? Or the child reaching out to mom. Mom's, of course, at work and distracted and not paying attention to the phone, and how many minutes go by? How about being a mom and picking up your phone to see that you've missed these text messages and your heart just sinking? Anyway, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution does a fantastic job kind of playing that out for you so that you can kind of get a sense of what that was like to be on one or either side of a back and forth text exchange like that. I want to go back to Ross Williams reporting at the Georgia Recorder with the Friday press conference Georgia House Democrats held. And can I, just going to say this again, Georgia House Democrats have a Twitter X page, they have a YouTube page, they have a Facebook account, they have an Instagram account. Their press conference is on none of those. I'd love to give you audio from this press conference, but there's no audio to be found of this press conference. If you want to reach an audience, if you want to get your message out, hello, Georgia Democratic Party, I'm begging you to come up with some sort of a better, more cohesive social media and information gathering and distributing plan, an action plan, so that this stuff is readily available for when folks want to use it to help you get your message out. I'm raising my hand. I'm telling you, I'm trying to help get this message out. And all I have is reporting, secondhand reporting. And look, Ross Williams is doing a fantastic job with the Georgia Recorder getting the message to you. But Ross, by the way, can't also be a reporter who sets up his iPhone or whatever to gather your video. And nobody wants to listen to the echoey video. Anyway, can you please, Georgia Democratic Party, Georgia House Democrats, Georgia Senate Democrats, who also, by the way, have all those same social media channels. The party itself has its own social media channels. This press conference can be found nowhere. It's Monday. This was held on Friday. This is the sort of stuff that just gets at me, not just because of what I do here with this podcast and being able to, replay the audio for you, but just because this is the sort of stuff that you want to get the message out, right? Do you? I think the latest Facebook Live video from the Georgia House Democrats is 2 years ago. Anyway, going back to Ross, I'm sorry for that. Just needed to get that off my chest. Going back to the Ross Williams reporting at the Georgia Recorder, he spoke, pretty matter-of-factly about some of the legislation that could or could not pass. Things that are non-starters or like assault weapons bans, he writes. Non-starters in a conservative-dominated legislature, an assault weapons ban, but he did speak to Representative James Beverly, saying that even bills with bipartisan agreement, like a $300 tax credit meant to encourage people to buy gun safety items like safes or trigger locks. James Beverly said those could not even reach final passage. That bill passed the House 162-3, but didn't even get a final vote in the Senate. Gun safety advocates celebrated in 2023 when another storage bill received a subcommittee hearing. Woo, not a hearing. Didn't get a vote, though. Ross Williams writes, that bill would have made it a crime to allow a gun to get into the hands of an unsupervised child if the child uses it to injure or kill someone, with some exceptions. The bill's author, Johns Creek Democratic Representative Dr. Michelle Au, said the bill may have prevented the attack if law enforcement had been able to ensure any guns in the home were stored safely during the initial contact in response to the teen's alleged threats. She said, that's what having passed HB 161 could have enabled us to do. That was a missed opportunity. I know that lots of people point to the fact that the father has now been arrested as an abdication of our responsibility to be like, oh, we already have the law. It's already illegal to furnish a firearm to a minor. However, when it comes to public health issues, we have to focus on prevention, not just punishment after the fact, not just intervention in the school with an armed guard, but how do we prevent these incidents from happening in the first place, she says. The way we do that is to prevent access from the minor to a firearm. Ross Williams writes in this piece, and I'll share it in the show notes, ronshowatl.com, that Dr. Au, physician, points out that gun violence is the number one cause of death for children and teens in the U.S., and that data shows safe storage laws lead to fewer kids being injured or killed by guns. So she says, so here's what I ask of our Republican majority. While they still hold that majority. Next session, we're going to bring back the Pediatric Health Safety Storage Act. I would like this bill to be assigned to the Public Health Committee, where it belongs. I would like this bill to be heard, and I would like for it to come to a vote, just like every other bill. We had the opportunity to do that this last term, and we did it. We had a chance to act, and we chose to do nothing. I think about this all the time. Every time I hear another story about a child accessing and being injured by or killed by an unsecured gun, and I wonder if some of my colleagues who were monitoring the situation closely this Wednesday have had those same thoughts, Dr. Au said, referencing social media posts from several elected Republicans. Of course, there will be no special session to address this. So, school kids will have to return to school at Appalachia High School at some point in time, and others are already back in class today, elsewhere throughout the state of Georgia. And it's September 9th. The legislature will not meet again until January, and goodness only knows what happens between now and then. There are many things they could work on, that they could do, that you would think there would be bipartisan support for. We mentioned some of those already. James Beverly mentioned some of those. Ross Williams reported on that. Georgia state law does not, by the way, have a minimum age to buy rifles. A minimum age. It does not require adults to accurately store guns. It does not require state permit to purchase a gun. Require a background check on all gun sales. It does not require firearms registration. It does not have an assault weapons law, of course. It does not have a magazine capacity restriction. It does not require a gun owner license. Georgia law does not require a permit for concealed carry or require a permit for open carry. And honestly, even in the case of the Appalachia shooter, there is no law that says that a father can't buy an AK-47 or an AR-15 for his minor child and give it to him or her as a birthday present or a Christmas present. Watching his prosecution is going to be interesting because there's a lot of gray area there. Like, at what point is a parent supposed to know or not know the mental wellness of his or her child or children at any given point in time? We've all been teenagers. We all know the instability of our emotions at that age from one day, 1 minute, 1 hour to the next. Now, in Colin Gray's case with his son Colt, having had a sheriff's investigator at your porch asking questions about online threats and guns before, okay. I mean, it's a little more spelled out. But it's not always so easily spelled out with kids, which is where Dr. Michelle Au's Pediatric Health Safety Storage Act comes into play. We're actually learning more about the mother and her intention to warn the school ahead of time. Yeah, the Washington Post is giving us that report. Stand by for that. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices. Follow the show, please, on your preferred social media platform at Ron Show ATL. Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. I think what I do on Instagram goes to Threads. I wish I could make that happen with Twitter, X, but you know Elon's not going to go for that. Something that... The second that we start talking about a mass shooting of any kind, obviously, politically, we all go to our flanks, our bunkers, and start volleying shots. The thing that sort of kills me is the hyperbolic hand-wringing from the right about someone coming for your guns. For the life of me, I don't understand it. I don't like. How do you? It's kind of like Trump's call for arresting anybody who is in the country without some sort of documentation. How are you going to? It's an impossibility. It is not even possible. We have to stop. We have to stop letting them get away with having that conversation about rounding up guns. Nobody's coming to round up squat. There's just room for some sensible. Even bipartisan, according to polling, agreement on things like universal background check, safety and storage. And by the way, not just for the individual gun owners, how about the retailers? How about folks who just have a pistol in their car? So many cars get popped in the inner cities because you've got perps who aren't just looking for cash or jewelry. They're looking for a weapon because some people keep a gun in their glove box. Do they keep it securely in their glove box? Unlikely in many cases. The first thing out of J.D. Vance's mouth at the climax of the Appalachia shooting last week, though.
Now look, the Kamala Harris answer to this is to take law-abiding American citizens' guns away from them.
No.
That is what Kamala Harris wants to do.
That's what she
Says,
said.
Look, I don't like this. I don't like to admit this. I don't like that this is a fact of life. But if you are a psycho and you want to make headlines, you realize that our schools are soft targets.
I also don't like the fact that he wants to call a mass shooting or a school shooting just a fact of life. It happens. The sun comes up, the sun comes down. Somebody's going to gun down your kid or teachers at school at some point in time. It's just a fact of life. We can do better than that. We can avoid that being a fact of life. His solution, and the solution for a lot on the right, is to turn our public schools into prison-like environments.
And we have got to bolster security at our schools so that a person who walks through the front door...
I hate to tell them, but there were security officers there.
We've got to bolster security so that if a psycho wants to walk through the front door and kill a bunch of children, they're not able to.
Well, the problem with that theory is that Colt Gray, age 14, was a student at Appalachia High School and probably didn't walk through a front door. Probably walked through, I don't know, a bus drop-off side door. There are so many doors when you have hundreds of students going into a school building that there is no one front door. He also said this, which I found really interesting.
And again, as a parent, do I want my kid's school to have additional security? No, of course I don't. I don't want my kids to go to school in a place where they feel like you've got to have additional security, but that is increasingly the reality that we live in.
But it's an unnecessary reality. It's a reality that can be changed with common sense solutions that are being offered that have bipartisan support, according to polling. Back to the Appalachia situation in and of itself. Sarah Blasky and Teo Armas at the Washington Post reporting that the mother of the suspected Appalachia High School gunman told family members that she called the school on the morning of the shooting and warned a counselor about an, quote, extreme emergency involving her 14-year-old son, according to text messages obtained by the Washington Post and an interview with a family member. That account is supported by a call log from the family's shared phone plan, which shows a 10-minute call from the mother's phone to the school starting at 9:50 a.m., about a half hour before witnesses have said the gunman opened fire. I was the one that notified the school counselor at the high school, Marcus Gray texted her sister following the shooting on September 4th, according to a screenshot of the exchange. I told them it was an extreme emergency and for them to go immediately and find my son to check on him. A counselor told Gray during the call that her son had been talking about a school shooting that morning, according to Gray's sister, Annie Brown, who described family discussions of the events to the Post. Around the same time, a school administrator went to the son's math classroom, according to Laela Sayarath, a student in the class. Sayarath said there seemed to be confusion involving another student in the class with a name similar to that of Gray's son. Neither student was in the room, and the official left with a backpack belonging to the similarly named student, she said. The shooting began minutes later. The Barrow County School Superintendent had no comment. The mother, her name's Marcy Gray, declined to elaborate on what had prompted her to call in the warning to the school, but she said she had shared that information with law enforcement. She called the shooting, quote, absolutely horrific and expressed remorse for the students and parents affected. I'm so sorry and cannot fathom the pain and the suffering they're going through right now. Gray telling the Post in a text message exchange. For a little more background, the Post provides that the call log and text were provided to the Post by Annie Brown, that is the aunt, who is the administrator of the family cellular plan. The text that Annie Brown received about Marcy Gray notifying the school were sent from a phone belonging to their mother, the suspect's grandmother. But Annie Brown said that Marcy Gray was the sender. The two address each other as sister in the exchange. A screenshot provided by Brown shows that the member that made the call to the school that morning was saved in Brown's phone under Mar, a shortened version of her sister's name, Marcy. Brown said her sister called the school after she learned something concerning about her son and feared an, quote, impending disaster. Brown said in the interview she did not know details about what her sister had learned or how. Annie Brown had previously told the Washington Post that her nephew had spent months, quote, begging for mental health help and that the, quote, adults around him failed him. His struggles were complicated by a difficult home life, she said. Further in the article, by the way, you learn that the week before the shooting, the teen's grandmother, Deborah Palamas, had met with the school counselor to request help for him. The Post has previously reported this, by the way. He, quote, starts with the therapist tomorrow, Palamas wrote in a text message to Annie Brown after that meeting. It's not clear whether the suspect actually attended that therapy session. Palamas has not responded to the Post's requests for comment. I'm reading a lot of attempts, tries to, all the things that we hear about, oh, well, we have to strengthen mental health, we have to do that. All the things that are offered as solutions other than sensible gun legislation all came up in a prelude to last week's school shooting at Appalachia High School, and none of them either came to fruition or seemed to obviously avoid what happened. This is The Ron Show, America One Radio and Progressive Voices.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
I'm going to tell you why I believe you always hear just the knee-jerk response from gun enthusiast politicians. Now's not the time. I believe that they say that because in the immediate aftermath of a mass shooting, when people are grieving, when people are mourning, it's obvious that when emotions are high, sometimes we can be a little irrational. No doubt about it. Any time somebody slaps you in the face, you may do something irrational immediately afterwards, right? In the immediate aftermath of yesterday's Falcons-Steelers game, I'm like, I'm ready for Michael Penix. And then I calmly gather my thoughts and realize, it's the first game of the season, new coaching staff, new offensive coordinator, quarterback, new to the system, new to the team, also coming off an injury. You didn't come here to listen to me talk about sports, I know, but the rational side of me goes, okay, now that I've had some time to think about it, the rational thing to do would be to learn from, what mistakes were made yesterday and move on. But we never, when it comes back to discussing gun policy, we never learn from the mistakes. We never look at the game film and go, all right, how can we avoid this? The obvious solution or solutions are almost always there for us. We just don't do anything about it. And to go back to the sports analogy, and this is not me talking about the Falcons so much specifically as much as in general, if you're the team's owner, for example, when you keep getting the result of loss after loss after loss, and your coaching staff keeps telling you that the obvious solution isn't so obvious to them when it's obvious to everyone else, it's time to hire a new head coach, right? Well, the Falcons did, obviously. And they've got a grace period. But when you hear from pro-gun enthusiast politicians, now's not the time. No, I actually disagree. I think now is the time. As you heard Representative Sarah Draper say in the press conference that the House Democrats here in Georgia held last Friday, no, now's not the time. Long ago would have been the time. Would have been the best time, she said. And then the second best time would be now. I feel like that there's this fear that because emotions are running high, the pro-gun enthusiast politician and the NRA are afraid that some tangible, actionable legislation might pass. Just safe gun storage. Tell me what is so anti-Second Amendment about safe gun storage? I've yet to hear anybody give me a cogent response to that. Either personally or just in the social sphere, in the conversation. Where is the NRA bona fide, that is anti-Second Amendment response to just safe storage? Like, it should be mandated, right? I mean, this is the sort of stuff my dad was doing in the 1980s when I was a kid. He had a gun cabinet. It was obviously a gun cabinet because we could see the guns through the glass. But it was also a locked gun cabinet. And that glass was impenetrable, unless you had a gun. If that was available in the 1980s, my God, what's available now? Why is it hard to mandate? And we're going to worry about a nanny state mandating gun storage. Well, have I got some news for you about being involved in women's reproductive decisions? Speaking of nanny states. No, I think that the reason that they don't want to call special sessions or have some decisive action in the immediate aftermath of senseless gun violence is because they're afraid that something might actually pass, something that has broad bipartisan support, something that shows that maybe they're wrong about the dangers of guns. Is that it? Do we not want to pass a law, Safe Storage Act, for example, that actually sort of tacitly, if not explicitly, spells out how dangerous guns are? Is that the problem? Is that bad for the gun industry? I'm trying to understand. Give me the downside. I want to hear the downside. I will say this. I was watching yesterday's episode of The Georgia Gang. That is the TV show that airs on Sundays here on WAGA Fox 5 Atlanta. They tape it on Friday. So this was just, 48 hours or so after the Appalachia High School shooting. You have two conservatives, two liberal pundits, and the moderator, host Lori Geary, who tries her best to play middle of the road. I happen to believe she's probably a little conservative. But you can hear even in her dialogue, suburban mom. She is a suburban mom. She has a beautiful family. That suburban mom vote that everybody's trying to go after in the next 60 days or so, right? You can hear in her tone and tenor that in the immediate aftermath, she wants something done. Let's dive into the conversation right about here.
This is a political talk show, so I know we are going to talk about what can be done to prevent things like this from happening. Brian, let's start with you. The authorities clearly sending a message. If you give your kids access to a gun and they commit a crime, you too will be charged. The dad's charged with second-degree murder.
And I think this is a really strong message. We saw this happen in Michigan, where two parents in that Michigan school shooting have been now sent to prison. And I think this is a gun control measure of its own. Like, this is going to send a message to parents about having dangerous weapons in the house that can be accessed by children. In this particular case, it's outrageous because we knew this kid was troubled. When the FBI comes knocking on your door and you respond by giving your kid an AR-15 for Christmas, you have lost your ever-loving mind. So we've got to send a signal to the rest of the state that this is not going to be tolerated, that we do believe in the Second Amendment in this state, and we are going to defend that right. But with rights come responsibilities. And if you are a parent, the rules for you have got to be a little bit different. You have got to be responsible. You are responsible not just for your child, but in this case, the security of other children, including mine, by the way. So it's very personal. It's really hard to talk about. Theron and I were on live air yesterday, and he had to take over for me because I couldn't get through my sentence, because we all think about our own children in these scenarios. And we have said for so long, there but by the grace of God goes Georgia. This has happened in other parts of the country, but not here. And now it has come home, and this is so raw and it is so personal. And I can't speak for all Republicans, but I do know that Republicans take this issue seriously. They want solutions. And maybe later we can talk about the resource officers, the security measures that were in place because of budget items that Republicans put into the budget in the last 2 years.
That's Brian K. Robinson, by the way. A Republican, a conservative, a GOP strategist. That's not a liberal talking, but he's talking about the sort of responsibility that a parent has and blah, blah, blah. There's nothing in the state law that dictates what Colin Gray did, giving his troubled son an AK-47 is against the law. Now, later in the same conversation, liberal pundit Theron Johnson did actually acknowledge and wanted to give a shout out to the school resource officers who did de-escalate the situation, although after 4 had been killed.
I want to say this. I want to give a shout out to these 2 resource officers who de-escalated the situation in the school. I don't know your names. I've been trying to find that information. But I want to thank you for stepping up and de-escalating this situation. But, Laura, we got to tell the truth about what's going on in this country. We can have a robust debate about legislation and gun safety, but it all comes down to responsible gun ownership. Mm-hmm. But there's something going on in this country that I think is rooted in hatred. Yep. And it's predominantly being committed. And I want to ask Phil and Brian to help me. This is not an attack, and we don't have to talk about it on the show, but help me understand what is going on in these young people's minds, in some cases, not all, young white men's minds that lead them to take a gun and to go to a school, a sacred place in this country, and kill innocent lives. We've got to have a very honest conversation about that.
Yes, we do. In fact, we had an honest conversation in some respects about that when I spoke with Jamila Jones, a.k.a. Sunny Day Jones, last week on this show. If you haven't caught that, you can listen to that show on Friday's episode of The Ron Show, wherever you podcast or at ronshowatl.com. And while Theron's speaking about hatred, I actually do want to speak about hatred as well. Last, what day was this? Last Thursday, around 12:45 p.m. Friend of the show, listens all the time, conservative radio host Austin Rhodes in my hometown of Augusta, Georgia, posted what I believe is an irresponsible Facebook post. He says, I've gotten some very strange information about the Appalachia High School shooter that I am attempting to verify. This is since last Thursday. It's Monday. He has not followed up on this. None of it has been reported yet, and it may be bogus. Okay. But, in all caps, but it would certainly explain a few interesting gaps, again in all caps, when it comes to the personal history of, air quotes, Colt Gray and his public school record. Stay tuned. Well, we're staying tuned. And I will say this. Somewhere in the comments, and I don't remember who it was that said it, the insinuation, because you see Colt Gray's mugshot, here it is, Eric Cahill chiming in. Because you see Eric Gray's, mugshot, the dirty blondish, I don't know if it's colored or not. It looks like it's colored to me. It's not a natural hair color, I don't think, much like Donald's. Wavy blondish, down to the shoulder hair. The first thinking is, again, Eric Cahill, go for it. I suspect he had gender issues. That is apparently the lead that Austin Rhodes is going on here. That apparently, according to Eric Cahill, he suspects gender issues. I responded. First off, long hair on rural white boys isn't unusual these days. I know this because I have nephews who live in rural white Georgia, white nephews. And a couple of them have long hair. And second, what if it's not gender issues that the boy, quote, suffered from as much as the societal blowback to whatever gender issues he may have? I mean, did Pops overcompensate by giving the boy an AK-47 to try and man him up? And then a point to the rap sheet. But actually, I know that this is what Austin's referring to because Austin chimes in response and says, Eric, bingo. That is exactly what I was told last night. And that would have been Wednesday night. Whatever Austin's source is, I don't know. But we want to talk about, Theron rightly points out, we want to talk about what hatred there is. And, there's been some murmuring after the Nashville shooting, the private school shooting about the androgyny or the sexual or the gender issues that the alleged shooter spoke to in their manifesto and et cetera and so on. Whatever facts belie that case or that manifesto stems from that is independent in and of itself. It still comes down to the ease of access to weapons of mass casualty, period, end of story. But we don't we don't seem to want to talk about, we want to talk about the hatred. Like if there is some sort of a blowback from school bullying, and we're hearing so much about how this kid was bullied, why is it that we want to point to the fact that the kid being bullied for whatever reason, gender issues or what have you, why is it that we want to have a discussion about the frailties or the shortcomings of the respondent, the kid being bullied, and not those who are bullying them for whatever reason, including what if a shooter had gender issues? I mean, you can't go on social media and tiptoe around, well, here's what I'm hearing. And I mean, look at the mugshot. It's pretty hair he's got. You can't tap dance around insinuating what you're insinuating and let one of your followers slam dunk your alley-oop. Here I am with the sports reference again. I apologize. And sit back and absolve yourself of culpability. Well, I'm not saying the kid might have been trans or considering his or her gender or their gender issues, but look at that long, wavy, golden hair down to the shoulder. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's why they did it. Well, maybe if that's the case, let's just follow it a step further. Maybe there's an issue with being bullied about it. And aren't you sort of contributing to that societally by even bringing that up? Which, by the way, there's nothing yet reported about that. And even if there is, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, it's right for a trans student to. No, it's not. It's not right for anybody to have, at that age specifically, and in that mental instability, to have access to an AK-47. And that's where the dad's culpability comes in. It doesn't change the fact that we should not be encouraging or giving a blind pass to bullying people or saying, well, they're trans. They were asking for it. What? Yeah, you can read a lot into that sort of social media dogmas, that sort of inference, that speculatory Facebook posting. It's dangerous. It's divisive, obviously, but irresponsible. I will, of course, share that post, as long as it's still up, in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. You are listening to The Ron Show on America One Radio, AmericaOneRadio.com, Progressive Voices, or wherever you podcast. Final few moments of The Ron Show, and to kind of put a bow tie on the whole speculatory nature of the, what's called great trans questioning bubbling up, if not in conservative media, certainly in the one conservative source that I found it. Listen, being trans is not a mental illness. Being gay is not a mental illness. They do, however, present challenges to anyone's mental wellness. That is indisputable. Trust me, I'm a 50-year-old gay white male who grew up in suburban Georgia in the 1980s. It was a challenge. It is still, for many kids, a challenge. I do want to, however, go back to the mental wellness or the emotional wellness of all of us when we're having this conversation about sensible gun legislation, however. Phil Kent, on the very same Georgia Gang show that I am giving you audio from that aired yesterday, on Friday morning, even Phil Kent, the conservative stalwart, had this to say about sensible gun legislation.
And we could probably talk about it later. I think that there's things the legislature can do that are responsible just to lock up these guns and have them safe.
I mean, that sounds to me like Phil Kent just endorsed Democratic Representative Dr. Michelle Au's safe storage legislation. Surely this is why Republicans don't want to talk now about gun legislation in the immediate aftermath of a mass shooting, because if Phil Kent can be assuaged to agree to safe gun storage legislation, well, my God, imagine what else could be passed in the aftermath of something so heinous with responsible and measured responses in the 48 to 36 to 72 hours after a mass shooting. Is the gun lobby fearful of something that would happen here like what happened in Australia, where they banned assault weapons in the immediate aftermath of a mass shooting decades ago? Well, God forbid. Friend of the show, Georgia Windlass Executive Director Melita Easters also chimed in on that conversation.
Well, I join you all in the condolences to the families. But you know, the Republicans have been in charge in Georgia for 2 decades.
Trifecta.
And thoughts and prayers from politicians who have never offered proposals for real policy changes that prevent these kinds of tragedies, those thoughts and prayers are just as empty as the shell casings on a bloodied school floor.
Wow.
And until we do something, until both parties work across the aisle to adopt some common sense things like gun storage regulations, like red flag laws, and maybe even an assault weapon ban, we won't prevent these tragedies in the future. Maintaining the status quo by doing nothing is a policy choice. And calling school shootings a fact of life, that's a policy choice. And we don't have to accept school shootings, and the voters of this state need to make their elected officials aware of how deeply they feel about this, because that is the only way you promote change.
And I mentioned when I dived into yesterday's episode of The Georgia Gang that Lori Geary, the host, is a fair-minded, for the most part, moderator and also a suburban mom. And she framed it in a way that made me think the suburban mom vote is obviously one that is coveted by both parties. But in this topic, on this topic, suburban moms are very much paying attention to policy discussion.
So let's talk about the political ramifications the school shooting will have here in Georgia. If suburban moms, like me, are a key voting population that could sway Georgia one way or another, what's the message, Brian? What's the message from Republicans?
The number one thing is we do care. And when people do say this is a fact of life, that is not the message. This is not a fact of life. We can stop this. And part of it is just being responsible. I will say on the Republican end, one thing that Democrats want to go to is basically keeping guns out of the hands of certain people. And the danger that many Republicans fear when it comes to a constitutional right is the government determining who gets a gun and who doesn't. To be able to say someone who's a political enemy has a mental illness as a way of taking their gun, that is something that is very real to people. But I know that's not what a mom or a dad wants to hear.
That is a slippery slope argument. Well, if they can determine that insane people shouldn't be allowed to have guns, what if it's easy to determine that I'm insane? Listen, if it's even in question in your mind, your sanity is something that can be questioned in your mind. You believe that you are susceptible to being deemed to be insane. Chances are you've done or said or thought something openly that makes people question your sanity for valid reasons. Sorry, not sorry. In the case of the Appalachia shooting, however, we're talking about a 14-year-old kid who, I'm sorry, was actually 13 when he was given an AK-47 for Christmas. I mean, where on earth would a responsible parent get the idea that that's, oh, wait, I see a picture of Thomas Massey, Republican congressperson from Kentucky, with his family holding guns back in 2021, days after 4 kids were killed in a shooting at a Michigan high school. When Republicans tell you it's a mental health problem, believe them. It's a mental health problem, all right. It's a culture problem. It's a gun culture problem. They're not wrong. They just don't realize that when they're out there pointing that one finger outward, that there are those 3 fingers coming back at them. That's going to do it for today's Ron Show. Show notes, I'll have them for you at ronshowatl.com. This show replays, by the way, 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 7 to 8 p.m. at Progressive Voices, and airs weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio, AmericaOneRadio.com as well, and wherever you podcast. Thank you for doing that if that's what you do. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.